to nice work, Mrs. Hannah. I'm going to pass across to Hannah Wilkes, and actually I'm going to let Hannah introduce herself a little more. And if you're watching, if you're customers of Sky, you watch Sky, or you watch YouTube Sky, you'd have seen Hannah across the Vitality Netball Super League this season. So much fantastic coverage, but I know she'll talk about the other sports that she works on too. And then Hannah's really keen to make this as interactive as we can, so please do post questions as we go through in the chat, or put your hand up. We're really happy people put a hand up, come off mute if you want to ask questions. And often I put questions at the end, but I think as we're going through, Hannah's really happy to hear more from you. So enough of me. I'm going to pass across to Hannah, and thank you so much for coming on, volunteering to come on and talk to us. So across to you.
Thanks very much, Sue. Hi everyone. It's really nice to see so many different faces, many of whom I'm not familiar with, and also a little bit daunting, which is helpful because this session is all about finding your voice. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Hannah Wilkes. I am a reporter, presenter, sometimes assistant producer at Sky Sports. Like Sue says, I work across the Netball Super League. I also work on NFL. I do the sport on Sky News. I basically do anything they want me to do and have a lot of fun whilst doing it. And I'm really delighted to be speaking to you all today. And like I said, a little bit nervous. There's one thing speaking to a camera or into a microphone. It's quite different seeing a sea of faces. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you all about, and hopefully following some of my own advice during this session. So it's all about finding your voice. And when Sue and Kate asked me to speak about it, it really got me thinking a lot about my journey in my career, how I've developed that confidence to speak up, the practical skills that I use every day at work to speak clearly, coherently, and not let any nerves I might be experiencing show. So I've been having a think about what transferable skills I can pass on that might be of use if you're in a big meeting, speaking to the media, have to address a large audience, or even if you're just in a smaller work environment and the notion of speaking up amongst a room full of people, even your peers, can be quite daunting. So I hope that this session will be helpful, will be useful. And I've also been thinking as well about what finding your voice truly means, and your authentic voice. We can explore that a little bit as we go as well. As Sue mentioned, really keen for this to be as interactive as possible, because it would feel quite silly almost if in a session called Finding Your Voice, everyone sat there really quietly. So if you do have any questions, stick a hand up. We'll go through the questions in the chat at the end, but do shout if there's anything you want to add or get involved with. So to start off, I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about my career. I have been at Sky Sports for a staggering 10 years, which was quite a terrifying thought when I realised it recently. I actually walked into Sky almost 11 years ago to the day for 2 weeks work experience whilst I was still at uni, and I basically refused to leave. I started working for them as a runner during university holidays, or whenever I could squeeze in a shift between writing my dissertation, and then started working for them full-time in June 2011. So yeah, a full 10 years, which is terrifying. So I was a runner to start with, and I'm sure lots of you are very familiar with what that role entails. I was photocopying, fetching teas, coffees, walking people from A to B, all the rest of it. And then I made my way up to sort of junior assistant producer roles. I took a job on Game Changers, which was our family sports show. That was so much fun. It was kids TV and sport combined into one chaotic live hour on a Saturday morning with 100 screaming children in the studio. And that show evolved quite a lot, and I started reporting on it and eventually became the presenter of Game Changers, which I did for three years, I think. And alongside that, I started building up my experience as a reporter across a variety of sports. I've got a equestrian family background, so started covering show jumping, which has taken me all over Europe and even out to Canada, and then moved into the NFL as well. And basically anything that I could get involved with and have a go at, that's basically what I did. And lo and behold, here we are in 2021, and I'm covering a whole range of sports. So just in case you've never seen what I do, I'm going to attempt to share a screen. Bear with me if this doesn't go too well. And I will hopefully, with you guys seeing minimal pictures of the cat, which is usually my camera roll, I'll just show you a little clip of what I do. Oh, here we go.
Hello and welcome to Overtime. We're at the quarter pole of the regular season. Some teams have started to separate themselves from the pack. Some teams are just finding their feet, and one has already fired their head coach. But the touchdowns are still flying in. Win for the Ravens sums up the AFC. Bills, Browns and Ravens marching on to join the Chiefs in the divisional round. So let's turn our attention to the NFC, and we'll start off in Seattle, where the Seahawks met their NFC West rivals, the Los Angeles Rams, for the third time this season. And to add to the drama, they have absolutely no idea which quarterback they'd be playing. Thank you so much for joining us. I think of all the multi-hyphenates, I think you might win with the many hats you wear. But it always comes back down to tennis, really, doesn't it? What is it about that sport that made you fall in love with it and dedicate your life to its development in every level? Hello and welcome along to the Women's Sport Debate, The Reaction. We've just had an hour of pretty lively conversation around the impact that COVID-19 has had on women's sports, and crucially, what we do next. We're going to unpick that whole conversation and all the reaction that's been coming in on social media during the last hour. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by a panel of sporting experts from across the sports sphere to help me do just that.
So if I stop sharing my screen now. Are we back? We're back. What I did quite cruelly there actually is Sue was in that sports debate, and I chopped her out before I introed you. No offense, Sue, but I think you were the fourth one I introed, so it took a long time to get round to you. So yeah, that's a taste of what I do, or at least have done over the last year or so. And even myself watching that back, there's things I'm picking up on, thinking, oh, I shouldn't have said that, should have breathed differently there, all the rest of it. But the key thing is that that's the last year's or so work, and the development from when I first started talking on camera and on screen to now is actually quite remarkable. And it's the same kind of principles that apply no matter where you are speaking and who you're speaking to. So there's a little bit of audience participation. I'm guessing everyone has been in a situation when you're in a meeting and you're surrounded by other people, maybe more senior than you. I'm not going to start completely man bashing, but maybe it's a male dominated room and you're sat there thinking, I've got this really strong point that I really believe in, but I don't feel like anyone's going to listen. Or if I do speak, I'm not sure how it's going to come out and I might not sound authoritative. And there are some really simple ways of combating that. And to put in perspective as well, there is no one in any public speaking role that hasn't dealt with those feelings at some point. And let's keep this in the group. But I was the runner when they relaunched Monday Night Football back in 2011 with Gary Neville. And we spent days rehearsing. And after his first live section, we went to commercial break. He went on the talk back and he went, I don't need stats. I don't need like people telling me what to wear or where to stand. He's like, what I need is someone to tell me how I don't get a dry mouth. And that was him obviously 10 years ago. And now he's very experienced, very relaxed broadcaster, but he was nervous. He got the dry mouth too. So for me, I think the first simple tip is to just be calm. Breathing is so obvious, but if you just take a good breath before you start speaking, you're instantly, you're going to put yourself at ease and make yourself calm. So breathe, first of all, always remember to breathe. And a tip that I was given really early on when I first started screen testing at Sky, and I still use to this day, and in fact I'm doing it now, is whether you're stood up or particularly if you're sat down, is to make sure that both your feet are really firmly on the floor. So you've got, even though you're sitting, a really strong stance, because especially when we're on Zoom, and we're in meeting situations, you've got a leg crossed, you're leaning back with the rest of it. Second, you sit really square with your sit bones, if you want to get yoga with it, firmly on the chair, your feet firmly on the floor. You're going to sit more upright, diaphragm, lungs, everything's where it needs to be. And you're just going to feel more powerful and in control. And it's something I still do now when I'm out on the road doing live reporting. I can so easily find myself standing at a funny angle and thinking, oh, I don't feel quite right. And then the second you ground your feet, your authority, it's like the equivalent of the power pose, but a bit more subtle. So ground yourself, take a breath. And I always find, and this is going to be the case of no matter who you are, in what scenario you're speaking in, even if it is just a small meeting, but amongst people that you're not usually comfortable speaking up around, if you've got an idea of what you're going to say or the key points you want to make before you start talking, you're going to put yourself at such an advantage. Yes, of course, we can't always be super prepared. That's not the way the world works. But especially if you're going into a big meeting or a big scenario, prepare what you're going to say. Like, it's the simplest thing, and it's so easy to forget to do. Prepare, have notes. I'm looking down at my notes now and between talking to you guys, because there's 50 of you on this call, and I know any second my brain could go blank. So have those notes there, and don't be afraid to use them. It doesn't show weakness. It doesn't show that you don't know what you're talking about. It shows that you've actually thought it through, and you've prepared, and you've come ready and researched. So those are sort of some tips. And I think as well, and it's an interesting one, and there's part of me that hates that we even have to think about this as women, but the way you use your voice has such an impact. And this now is not my usual speaking voice when I'm talking to my friends or family or whatever. This voice now is definitely a bit lower than the screechy voice I can come out with at home. It's one of those things I do it without even realizing now. But if you're nervous of speaking, particularly to a larger group, just lowering your voice a notch will make you feel calmer. You'll sound calmer, even if you are shaking like a leaf inside, and it will give you authority. Speaking slowly, deliberately, and just lowering the pitch a tiny bit can really make a huge difference. And the speed of your voice as well. I'm the worst for speaking really quickly. So slowing it down to the point where you feel like you might sound ridiculous, it's going to sound better than you think, and it gives you that authority. So we've talked about breathing, voice, grounding, using your body language as well, making sure you feel really calm and secure in where you're sitting, preparing yourself as well. And don't be afraid as well, if there's something you're not sure of, ask someone. I think we're so afraid of looking like we don't know things that we then we don't find out the answers to questions we have. And I think that we need to remember that we can take other people's opinions and ask for help in situations where we don't necessarily know the answers. And as well, I think, especially if you're addressing a large group, practice. Like before I logged onto this call earlier, I was walking around my kitchen saying, not at full volume, obviously, but it could be if you want, practicing what I was going to say once Sue had introduced me, because yes, I talk to cameras for a living, and sometimes you don't have time to prepare, but if you do, running it through a few times, saying it out loud, because even if you've written it down, once you actually say the words, it can come out quite differently, and you'll think, oh, actually I should add that in, or oh, I might be able to insert some light humour here. So say things out loud, whether that's in your car on the way to the meeting, in the shower, wherever you are. Don't be, all the best people do it, all the best communicators I know have never stood up on a stage, no matter what the situation is, and said what they're saying for the very first time. It's been written and it's been practiced, and it's so easy to think that it just comes naturally, when actually you've got to put the work in and just have that clear idea of what you're saying. You might not end up saying anything you wrote down or practiced earlier, but just going through that process, I think, really helps get you in the mindset to deliver what you're trying to get to, even if you're not using the exact same words, if that makes sense. And then in terms of practicalities as well, one of the key things, and this is actually a pet peeve, that in the last 18 months working from home with my partner, I have given him some strong feedback on, and it's not gone down well, but he's learning, is intonation. Whatever you do when you are any meeting, especially if you're talking to the media, try not to go up at the end of every sentence. You want to go down, keep your voice neutral, because that gives you more authority. And if you go up, you always sound like you're asking a question. That was trying to exaggerate there for the point I'm trying to make. But if you try and go down with your intonation, or sort of flat with your intonation, and once you start listening out for yourself doing it, you'll notice that gives so much authority. And I think it's quite calming to yourself as well, because again, it's just keeping delivery steady. So even if you're starting to panic that your mind's going blank, or I'm getting a really dry mouth, you're just giving yourself more time. Sue, you've raised a hand.
I did. I was just showing. I'm going to ask Carol to ask her fabulous question. Do you want to ask away? And then a beautiful lady whose name I can't pronounce. So the other lady that's asked a question to ask her question too. So Carol, do you want to fire away?
Hi, Hannah. I just wanted to ask, what advice did Gary Neville get to avoid dry mouth?
Drink some water, but also when you're that stressed, it doesn't help. So I always find this, and actually your mouth might feel really dry, but once you start talking, it'll actually be okay, because so gross. Saliva just starts doing what it's there to do. It's that feeling beforehand, and I get this all the time still when I do the sport on Sky News. I'm sat there, you've got commercial break before they come to you, and the presenter in the studio is going to throw in, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. They get to the 10 seconds where they play out the sponsorship bumper when they throw to sport, and you think, there's nothing. It's like a Sahara in my mouth, and it's terrifying, and you haven't got time to get a drink. It's never as bad as you think it is. Once you actually start talking, it tends to go away, which I think we trick ourselves and think this is it. I can't say anything. There's nothing in there. It's not actually as bad as you think. You just have to take a breath, get some water if you can, but it will go away once you start speaking.
And a lovely lady, I could try your name of Tupakigwe, but you'll correct me.
It's Tupakigwe, but you can call me Tupa. It's a lot easier.
Thank you. Do you want to ask your question?
Oh, thank you so much. My question was, how do you try not to speak too fast? Obviously, when you get really nervous, the usual tendency is to speak really quickly, which I kind of am full guilty of. So what's your advice of trying not to speak too quickly?
I am so guilty of it myself as well. I get very fast and shrill when I'm nervous. It kind of comes down to practice. And one thing I found really helpful as well, and this is something I did to get used to being able to read an auto cue, but actually I find it helps in any kind of speaking publicly, is literally if you just read out loud, whether it's a book or a newspaper in your own time, or even a magazine, every now and again, rather than just reading ahead like we always usually do, if you read out loud, you notice you speak slower than you would if you're reading in your head. And it's that sort of practice that if you do it enough, it's sort of a transferable skill, because you learn how to speak more slowly and to be more deliberate with how to speak, if that makes sense. And it's just one of those things as well. You just have to keep telling it to yourself, slower, slower, slower. You get to a point where you might think that you sound like you've been played in slow motion and you sound ridiculous, but I promise you, you don't. You're never as slow as you sound in your head. You're always faster than you think you are.
Fantastic, thank you so much.
That's brilliant. But we can have some practice sessions on here, can we? Maybe that's what we need, is to be in smaller groups and practicing the talking slowly. So we're going to let you carry on in a minute, Hannah, but just quickly, Imi's got a question too. Imi, do you want to ask yours on the subject of nervousness? Oh, you're on mute, lovely.
Mute. Hi everyone. Hannah, really nice to meet you. What happens when your hands shake? Because you might be kind of calm, know what you're talking about, you've done your breathing, and then the nervous system just takes over and you're talking to.
I completely get what you mean. I find I'm not such a handshaker, it's more full body, which can be even worse. But again, it's one of those, if it's your hands, do something with them, clasp them together. I'm just like, obviously not up here, but just so you can see, clasp them together, hold them together. Hold something. If you're talking to a microphone, don't be afraid to hold it two-handed. I quite often do. Or if you've got notes, I do find if you're doing any kind of public speaking that involves a microphone or a larger audience, having something to do with your hands is actually one of the best things you can do, because if you're fiddling and not sure what to do, that we've all been there, right? You've seen someone talking and they don't know where to put their hands and it's really uncomfortable to watch. Whatever you do with them, as long as it's keeping them kind of, I mean, I'm a handsy talker, so it's hard for me to tell people to hold their hands still. But as long as it's deliberate, I think no one's going to notice your hands shaking other than you. So either hold that microphone more firmly, clasp them, or use them how you naturally use them. If you're a hand speaker, don't try and kind of, hide them away, because that's going to make you feel more uncomfortable. But I wouldn't worry too much about it, because no one else will see them. And I think that's what a lot of this comes down to. A lot of the things that we all experience when we're nervous, no one else actually notices. It's just us. It's like when if you're talking And there's nothing worse than this for live TV, when your mind goes blank, which happens in conversations all the time, right? We forget words, we forget what things are called. It happens. When it's in front of a large group, it feels like an absolute eternity, and like the world has slowed down, stopped, and everyone's just looking at you whilst you cannot think of a single English word. And actually, it's never as bad as you think it is. And I can promise you this, because I've had moments where I literally thought the world stopped spinning for a full 10 seconds whilst I stood there on camera and could not say a word. When I watched it back, it's like half a second and no one else noticed. It's just so much worse for you. So it's reminding yourself all of these things that you might be experiencing. Fake it till you feel it. Most people aren't picking up on them unless it's really obvious.
Thank you, it's really helpful. Thank you.
I'll let you carry on. I'll stop interrupting.
Oh no, it's fine. So sort of the practical stuff that we've talked about, and you guys have picked up on as well, is that breathing, using your body firmly, strongly, practicing with your voice, just talking slower, try it in your everyday life too, just slowing down. You'll be amazed at how much more power you have over people as well when you talk to them slowly. It's almost quite unnerving for people, I think, if you speak with such authority and calmness, that they listen to every word that you have to say. And like I said as well, when you do experience those sort of physical manifestations of nervousness, it's never as bad as you think it is in your head. And you know, I'm in a relatively fortunate position that my most nervous moments have been on camera, so I can watch them back and go, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was. For example, that last clip from the little reel I showed you from the women's sport debate, what you can't tell is I was sweating profusely and shaking through that whole thing. But it's almost I don't know, if you just focus your mind enough, it's not going to be that obvious. And then prepare and practice, and you will always be okay, or at least say something vaguely similar to what you intended to go in there to say. I think if you've got a clear idea of your main points and what you're there to do, then you can get there a roundabout way, but you will end up delivering what you're aiming to. And I think we all need to as well remember not to be too harsh on ourselves. No one is perfect. In day-to-day conversation, like I mentioned, you don't get through it without a stumble over a word or a slight mind slip, or you know, that's not how normal conversation works. So when we're speaking in a meeting to a larger audience, there shouldn't be any expectation that it's any different. It's natural. It's how the human brain and mouth and communication work. So be kind to yourself. I've just seen that question from Pooja. How do you break the habit of saying and when speaking in a formal setting, please? Frankly, Pooja, I haven't mastered that. I don't think it's something people notice as much as you do. And if you pause, I'm kind of doing it now because I don't know how to answer this question. It's choosing words deliberately, and don't worry about it if you do. I don't think people judge us as much for it as we think they do. And I think that's an inherently female thing, that any sort of hesitation is seen as a sign of weakness. And I don't think it's the end of the world at all. But again, if you're speaking slowly, you can buy yourself time with just using words, and don't worry about it too much. I just you see, it's very normal. It's part of how we communicate. So that's again, now I'm really paranoid. So that's the sort of practical side of it from what I was thinking about in terms of finding your voice. I know some of that is really obvious stuff, but I think sometimes it's worth reminding ourselves that actually no one's perfect. It all takes practice. The more we do it, the better we get. And as much as we all hate to do it, sometimes if you do have the opportunity to be able to watch yourself back in a sort of presentation setting, it's torturous, but it is the best thing you can do to help yourself learn. I hate doing it. I still have to do it for work because it is the only way you ever get better. But it's not pleasant. No one likes watching themselves back. But whether it's a Zoom meeting that's recorded, or a presentation, you can just have a phone recording it to one side. It will help you if you are able to watch yourself back. And if you're a broadcaster on TV or radio and what you do naturally is recorded, you're sort of doing yourself a disservice if you don't put yourself through the pain of watching it back and endeavouring to learn from it. I think we're all our own harshest critics, and some of the things you pick up on, no one else would notice and will think you're being very pernickety. But I think that's how we get better in how we learn and how we do improve, and then become excellent communicators across the board at all times. As Carol says she does when delivering new training, she always has a practice that she records and watch back. Exactly, Carol, that's the way to do it. So the other thing I kind of wanted to talk about in regard to finding your voice is literally finding your voice and the confidence to speak up and to knowing your own value. And I know there's been plenty of sessions that the Women's Sport Collective have run about imposter syndrome, and it also ties into that a little bit. We all have it, we do, and if anyone doesn't, I salute you, bow to your greatness. I can't wait for the day mine leaves the building. And I think we've all been in those situations. I know I certainly have, where you're in a room, in a meeting, you found the confidence to speak up, and you sit there think everyone looking at you, and I don't know if anyone else does this, so I assume I'm not alone. You think to yourself, are they just being polite, or are they waiting for me to stop talking because is what I'm saying stupid? I can see loads of you kind of smiling, so I know I'm not the only one. And that's just it, isn't it? It's like, I'm halfway through this point I'm making. Is everyone actually interested? And I think what comes down to a lot of the time is a lot of people, depending on their communication style, are ultimately not listening to what you're saying and waiting for you to finish so that they can just come back and not really take it in. So I think you have to remember that your point is always valid. That doesn't apply for everyone, but in some of the situations in my mind where I felt like that, in hindsight, I think that's maybe the case. And quite often you think, oh my goodness, they think I'm making a really stupid point here, have I completely missed the mark? And actually it's probably that you're bringing something completely new and fresh that they haven't heard before. And that is the whole point, right, of diversity in sport in particular, but just in the world more widely. We all have different perspectives, different experiences, and that is why as women in sport we are in the room. Partly it's to bring that fresh perspective and to bring something new, so have the confidence in that. And it might be a point that's never been made before, but that is its value. And I know as well that it's very easy to feel like you might have to fit a mold of the people that you work with, especially if you are the only woman in your work sphere. You think, oh, I must fit in with the guys and I mustn't be seen as different, but actually that difference is part of the reason you're there. It is to bring something different, bring something new, bring a fresh take on things. And I know when I started working more closely in the NFL, I was such a fool for doing this. You're thinking, oh, well, these guys are talking really tactically, then I must understand, all these different defensive formations and this, that, and the other. Not until you get a bit further in that you go, well, actually, I'm not there because I'm an NFL tactical genius. I'm there because I love the sport, I know the sport, and my take on it is a bit different. And that's how we create something better, is everyone looking at things from a different perspective. And I've even done it with other women in the NFL, particularly looking at stateside and how they conduct themselves and present themselves. And you find yourself trying to sort of mirror their style, but ultimately you're in the room because of who you are and what you bring and your voice, and it's got so much value. So you just trust yourselves. I feel like I might be rambling slightly here. So I think when it comes to finding your voice, it is a journey, it's a lesson, it's something that's taken me more and more time. And I notice sort of every year or so feeling more comfortable with who I am and what I bring, but it's something that doesn't happen overnight. And you kind of have to lean into the journey of it. I think sometimes you're so worried about being picked apart or someone questioning you that you forget that actually you've got value, you've got an opinion, and it is valid, and it's probably very useful. And if someone does pick it apart, that might be their own insecurity rather than because what you're saying is inherently wrong. I think that the trick is, when you're finding your voice and speaking up, is to not overcomplicate, not overthink. And especially if you're in a room full of people that you feel have got more expertise than you or got more experience than you, don't fall into the trap of trying to use terminology and phrases that you don't fully understand, because that's how you get found out. Being there and being yourself and being upfront with who you are and what you know, and making your point based on that is just so valuable. And at the end of the day, I think that the simplest advice when it comes to finding your voice is just keep it simple. Say what you want to say, don't overthink it, trust your gut, and remember that who you are is why you're there, and what you have to say matters and is important and is actually your gift to whoever you're speaking to. So yeah, I think that kind of sums up my ramblings on the thoughts of finding your voice. So very keen, Sue, to get some more questions going, and anyone wants to share their experiences of being in those kind of situations where you feel like everyone's staring at you and finding a way through that.
Thank you. I'm going to use this opportunity to ask you my question while you're here too. I guess one of the things I often, my Kate knows this because she hears me talk about it all the time, but almost doing media stuff, and I always worry that I'm going to lose the fact and not be able to articulate the stats and that knowledge. I can't hold it all in my head, and I bet that's probably potentially my age and whatever, like that whole menopause, foggy brain. But I do worry sometimes that I've got it in here and I'm going to be there and I just won't be able to keep a grasp of the facts. So what advice would you give? And I guess I just saw even in your little trailer, that amazing, you're chatting to Judy Murray, you seem completely natural, but how do you make sure you're confident enough to hold the information in your head?
It comes down a lot of the time to doing homework, and especially working in a sport like the NFL, which is really stat heavy. It can be very easy to get yourself muddled, or if you haven't got a brain for numbers, which naturally I don't, they do sometimes feel like they just leave the building, don't they? But I think if you've done the homework, and I often think as well, we get so bogged down in the detail of stats that sometimes we use them almost too much. If you've got a stat when you're talking about your book, you don't need to necessarily give the exact number. You can just, the data shows. You can speak more broadly and still make the point and know that yourself, if someone wants to check you up on it, when they look it up, the number will be there. I think it's something that we, particularly as women in sport, do, is that we often have this need to show how much we know. Because for so long that's been one of the things thrown at women in sport, hasn't it? Like, oh, why is she talking about that? What does she know? What perspective has she got? She's never played the game. What does she know about this? So I think we can very easily overcompensate by trying to prove ourselves too much. Whereas if you've done the research, you know the stuff. If you can't remember the exact number in that moment, your point is still valid. And what you're saying is correct. The other thing as well, little secret for you here, with that Judy Murray chat, for example, obviously big open camera situation. I had the world's tiniest piece of paper on my leg, and my leg was crossed, my foot went to sleep, because it was a long interview. I was chatting to her for an hour with bullet points of the question. And in anything you do, no one's ever going to say, oh no, you can't bring notes into this meeting, or you can't bring notes onto this set when you're a panelist. There is no rule that says that. So and I find I'm an over preparer. I prepare reams of notes for everything I do. When it comes to it, you don't tend to look at them, but if you know they're there, suddenly the stuff stays in your head. And if you do need to look at it to double check, then there's no harm in that at all. So I think it's not putting too much pressure on ourselves to prove what we know and to know everything, because we're there because of our broad understanding as well as the detail that we do possess.
Excellent. There's some questions coming in, fantastic questions in the chat there, which I'm happy to take, or people can pop themselves off of mute. So I don't know who we will start with there. So Louise, do you want to ask your question? I think that's a question I'm reading and talking as we go. Is Louise there? We'll move on to one-handed lady.
Sorry, Sue, I was just making a... Sorry, Sue, my reception is in and out, but it was more that I was in a meeting during comment I made was taken completely different than my intention, and it really dented my confidence, and I've been massively overthinking my approach to communication, and I've really struggled with it. But I just wanted to say thanks, because listening to you guys for the last half an hour, 40 minutes, it's just made me realize that actually it probably was that he wasn't actually listening to me. He completely overreacted in the meeting, and it made me feel like the comment I made was the opposite to my intention. Now, I've done a lot of reflecting, and I keep running over, like a lot of people on this call, overthinking it over and over again. But I'm now sure that I did say the right thing, and I did have the right intention. But it was just, I suppose, to be more aware that people's communication skills are different to mine. So thank you for that.
I'm glad that you feel calmer about it. I'm the worst overthinker, and any comment that I feel you know, I've done it on shows before and I thought, oh my goodness, maybe I shouldn't have said that. And I've beaten myself up about it to the point where I've like texted the producer, like, maybe we should cut that out. And they're like, why? It's absolutely fine. I think I made a joke in one of our NFL shows this year. There was at one game when they didn't have fans, they had a cutout of The Rock next to the Queen. And it was like they were watching together. And someone said, oh, I thought that that was going to be Mrs. Rock. And I went, well, maybe the Queen likes a toy boy. And I was like, oh my God, I should not have said that about Her Majesty the Queen. Obviously, it's all light humor. It's all, you know, it was like, but it literally, I saw someone just put their hand over their mouth. Now I'm worrying about it again. But, you know, we say these things and it's fine. It's fine. And it's usually like you said, Louise, the guy probably wasn't listening to you, or I think this is, again, not to be male bashing, but I think sometimes some men aren't used to women making points in a certain way, and they react to this small part and this much bigger point you're trying to make. It's really frustrating, but I think you said what you needed to say and what your intention was, so hold on to that and try not to overthink it, like I am now overthinking the Queen comment again.
I'm going to pick up on humour then. That's interesting, the humour. Carol, do you want to ask your question? Because that's a great question too.
So I've loved the way, Hannah, that you've put humour into this, into the things you're saying. And I am very dry and very matter of fact in everything I do. So I would love to know if you've got any tips for how to incorporate a bit of humour.
I have to say, I think I do it as almost a sort of nerve thing sometimes. But then also, it's like I was saying earlier, I think if that's who you are, then you should bring it with you, because that is your authentic voice. That is how you talk in your day-to-day life amongst your friends. And there's no reason, as long as you're not saying something offensive, that you shouldn't bring that to your work and to how you communicate to people more widely. That's something that I've really learned as well, especially when I started working on the NFL. It's very easy to be accused of being like fluffy, token woman, this, that, and the other, and it can really dent your confidence. And I got a few of those comments from the delightful people on Twitter, and you start overcompensating and being really straight-laced, but then that's not me, like, that's not who I am. I do what I do because I love sport, and I genuinely believe watching sport should be enjoyment first. And so actually you have to lean into that part of yourself. And I think we get taught that, you know, professional dresses a certain way and talks a certain way. And that's only because for so long it was only men in these sort of roles, or a certain type of man in business generally, not just sports. So I think be who you are, bring it to the table. I think everyone loves a dry sense of humour and a comment. And like I say, if you're not offending anyone, I mean, test a toe, put a toe in the water, see how it goes down the first couple of times you try it. But I think lean into it. It's who you are. If that's how you talk, I think you'll probably find you're calmer then communicating, because you're just speaking how you talk rather than trying to be someone else. I think that's so true, isn't it? I think it's about being human. That's the thing I think I've discovered the last few years. But it's almost the being, we talk about authentic self, but being the natural you. And I think that's something people haven't seen. I was thinking about how amazing Latalo Mohammed, the guy commentating on the Taekwondo in the last couple of days, have been, and like people gone mad for him on social media. But it's because he's just so natural and is real, and is not a typical, as you might expect, a typical male sports presenter or pundit. He's just himself, and that's what it feels like we've all really loved. I've got one-handed Lady Gold first. I don't know you, I don't know your other name, but please do ask your question.
All right, there we are. Hi there. Yes, I am one-handed lady golfer because I'm one-handed. Well, I do speak a lot, and I do speak in the media. I do a lot of podcasts. There are times where I get lost, my train of thought, and I go off topic. I might get caught on one point, and then how do you gracefully get yourself and your audience back there? Because sometimes if you just abruptly up and then you start off, it doesn't flow together.
Yeah, I do that all the time too. I'm one of those people, my brain can go in about 7 different directions at once, and I struggle to keep up. I think if that's the way you talk and that's the way you are, I think lean into it. I've done it on podcasts when I've been a guest on podcasts, and I've gone off one way and then I've gone, oh, I've gone really long-winded here. what was the question? Or what were we talking about? And I think, again, that is how normal conversation flows. You know, when you're talking with your friends, it's not like someone raises a topic and you do a round table and then you move on. Like, it goes here, 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 and that's the joy of it. So I think you can always bring it back quite naturally, because you can go off on this massive long tangent and you can literally lean into it. So, and then to bring it back to what we were talking about originally, you can literally just use your words to steer the conversation back around. There's no shame in that. There's nothing wrong with that. It is something that happens in day-to-day conversations. So don't worry about it too much. And if you need to be reminded what you were talking about, again, we're all human. There's nothing wrong with that.
Excellent, thank you so much. It's brilliant. So much fantastic advice. Rachel, would you like to ask your questions? It's definitely something that I struggle with too.
Hi, Hannah. Firstly, thank you so much. It's been so interesting listening to what you have to say. Just as a quick background, I have a startup company. So I've been talking to investors, and although I feel like I know my business better than anyone else, it's very different when you are talking to 50-plus-year-old men. And like you said, not to be a male basher, but I am 28, and you obviously have this sort of imposter syndrome in meetings. So whenever I've been going into meetings, I thoroughly prepare for anything. It's just the way that I am. But then I take notes before, of course, of what I would like to say, what I would like to communicate. And then there've been times where I'm in a meeting and either I've completely overcompensated with my note taking and I don't end up using them at all because I'm like, that's way too complex, or I feel like I haven't prepared enough and I can't effectively communicate what I want to communicate. So I wondered if you have any tips, better ways of taking notes, or what's kind of worked for you. Because I mean, even watching you on this call, you have your notes, but it's not, they're there as a, just help if you need, but I can't see you looking at your notes. It's not obvious,
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, and I'm very similar in that I'm an over-preparer. So I've been working on for TalkSport on the Lions recently, and I grew up on my rugby and I love my rugby and I know it inside out, but I've not broadcast it other than reporting on a few games in the past. I've not sort of broadcast it intently before. So I was like, I need to have all the information at my fingertips. So I've got this huge document before every show, which is just, when you get on air, completely redundant and not helpful at all, because I can't make head nor tail of it. And there's just too much information. So one thing that tends to work for me, and I do this on a lot of different sports, and I kind of did it today actually as well. You do the brain dump document where it's like, makes no sense, but you get all those thoughts out, because I'm one of those people as well. I can't just read it, I have to write it in some form or it doesn't go in. Have the brain dump document where there's everything there, but then bullet points. It's like what I was saying with the Judy Murray interview and that whole series. We were doing these hour-long interviews, so obviously there's a lot of questions, and I had them type them all out, wrote them all out, because you want to know how you're going to phrase it and make sure that you're really hitting the right points. But I can't hold all that information in my head. And when I'm talking to her, when we're filming it like that, there's nowhere for those notes to be without me looking like I've actually done no preparation, because I'm reading every question. So it's then the tiniest bit of paper with just bullet points. And I think if you trust yourself, because you do know your company inside out, I think if you literally had simple bullet points on one small piece of paper, or on an iPad, whatever it is in front of you, that might actually, because those bullet points will trigger the knowledge of everything that's on the massive document of notes. So I think you need to trust yourself, because you will get it all in there. You will have it all, and just those couple of words that trigger it might be more useful. I don't know. Maybe.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Hannah.
Excellent. Oh, it's all such useful, practical stuff. Have we got another 5 minutes or so? I don't know if people have got any questions, want to put any hands up if they have questions. I'm looking at Kate Hannon. Have you got any questions? Yes.
I've seen a question from Imi about, do people ever think you're not enough of an expert? And I will definitely speak to that. Yes, all the time. And as a female broadcaster in particular, it doesn't matter who you are or what you've done, people are always going to ask that question. And it's very frustrating. And it very easily gets in your head. But ultimately, you're there for a reason. As I once said to someone, no one you ever see, no female you ever see sports broadcasting is there for any other reason than that she's worked really damn hard and she knows what she's talking about. And I think you just have to remind yourself of that, because it's the easiest thing for people to throw at you, that you don't know what you're talking about, but you do. And you probably know more than they do, because you probably work harder at it and making sure you know everything. So yeah, people often think that you just have to try, easier said than done, to not let them get in your head.
Lovely question from Sian there. Sian, would you like to ask your question?
Just working out how to use the buttons. Hi, Hannah. Quick, any tips as a journalist? You ask a lot of tough questions to people. What about facing them the other way around and how that might translate to a job interview?
So answering questions in a job interview.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't think I'm very good at job interviews, and I always prefer asking the questions. So as a journalist, you know what you want out of an answer, right? You want someone to put the question in the answer and then make a few clear points that you can then either follow up on or just will give you everything you need to know. So I think it's kind of similar. So when you're asked a question in a job interview, take a breath for 1 second. Definitely, always take a breath. And almost repeat the question back to them, but in a subtle way. Put the question in your answer, and I find when I've been in those kind of situations, even if I'm not sure I'm going to start with, by the time you sort of set yourself up, the thoughts start flowing and start coming. And it's something that I find, especially when I go on like podcasts as a guest, I get really stressed by the fact that I'm being asked a question and I don't know what the question's going to be. And I always try and get them to tell me what they're going to ask first, but they never will. They're like, oh, it's just a chat. And you feel like you're being interrogated. So yeah, put the question in your answer, take a breath, and just try and hit 2 or 3 clear points. Use examples as well, and just remain calm. Give them, I mean, you've asked journalistic questions, you know what you want from the other side of it, and you want a clear, coherent answer that more than anything answers the question. Don't be afraid, like we were talking about earlier. If you go off on a tangent, make sure you keep on circling back, because I find when you are interviewing someone, and they can very easily do it too, and if they haven't answered your question, you're like, well, now I have to ask you it again in a slightly different manner, because I need this answer. So just make sure you circle back and hit that question, and don't be afraid to throw a question back as well, because I love it when people, I hate it when people do that to me in live interviews, but it does make for good TV.
Excellent, thank you. And I definitely think the whole eye contact and smiling and engaging, I think that can make a massive difference, both in terms of your talking, whether it's to media or interviews too. I think we sometimes overlook the importance of the personal engagement and smiling, and yeah, direct eye contact does make a big difference, and that isn't always the case, is it? I've got a final question here from Jenny Morris. Do you want to ask it, Jenny?
Yeah, thank you very much. So Hannah, I have a real habit of repeating myself, so I'll give the answer, I'll then just add a little bit more, and then I'll go back and repeat the whole answer again, and I don't know how many other people suffer from that. I think it's a mixture of nerves and also not being sure if you've been understood, and people have heard your point. So I just wondered how you kind of manage that in terms of stopping at the right time.
Well, Jenny, I think if you've been watching the last hour or so, you'll know I'm very guilty of that too. It's so easy to do. And I think it is, again, it comes back to having that trust in yourself. And if you are repeating it, or if you do think, oh, I missed this certain element of this that I want to incorporate in there, then rephrase it slightly so it doesn't sound too repeated, but also don't worry about it too much. I think we all do it, and as you're talking, naturally, the way our brains work, you think of more things to add and more things to say, and you can just drop in little phrases that you know help with that. So, and to follow up and to just build on what I said previously about this, call it out, acknowledge it. We have this expectation of ourselves, which I know I have definitely said, of being these crystal clear, flawless communicators all of the time. And that's just not the case for any of us. So acknowledge it, say, if I can just add to what I was saying here, or, and I know I've mentioned this earlier, but I think that's fine. I think if you're making it a clear point and you are adding something different, then that is absolutely fine. Don't beat yourself up too much. I'm sure you're making clear points and making people think.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We're getting some more questions in now.